Hey everyone, Josh Taylor here from CE Podcast. Thank you so much for being a part of another episode. We're so happy, so grateful, especially me, of course. The podcast has just been on fire. Lots of questions, lots of people, wanting advice. So again, if you have anything, especially, everyone counts, of course. But out there to our premium subscribers, if you have specific things that you would love for me to talk about, things maybe that you're having trouble at home, or if you even want to maybe send a bunch of questions where the podcast is, I wouldn't say entirely about that specific situation, but a big portion of it could be about what's going on at home. So please let me know. Okay, CE podcast at k9education.ca. So today I wanted to just get into a little bit of our story time. Every time I do story time on the CE podcast, everyone always says like more stories. So I know the advice is good. People like the advice, but people love hearing the stories. So I thought today some things that we could talk about were what expectations should be when we are dealing with science-based positive reinforcement. As people know, and they've been wanting me to talk about the history, and I think we'll get into that on another episode for sure, about how I got to where I am now, why I'm science-based, etc. Getting into more details, I guess, about it. But again, let's get into what that success really looks like. And I think something that has been probably the hardest for me in the sense of like the transition is that people have to have a lot more patience when it comes to doing things right. I guess that is a good way to describe it. I find that when we are working, especially with complicated behaviors, we typically think that our dog is somewhat of, I'm just generalizing here, right? So this isn't counting everyone, of course, but over the 18 years of doing this, the experience I've received is that, including myself, there was a time, once upon a time, where I did feel like this, where everything dog related is somewhat of a machine. So what I mean by that is the way our dog acts, if they're not acting a specific way or a certain way, they're broken. When it comes to barking, when it comes to lunging, when it comes to reactivity, when it comes to the big ones that really embarrass us, typically the first response is that, well, obviously I don't want my dog to act like this, sure. But secondly, I've had 4 German Shepherds, I've never had a German Shepherd like this. Or, it's always either breed specific or the generalization of I had 3 German Shepherds or I had 2 Dobermans, and this Doberman is nothing like the other Dobermans. So we typically have this thing where all dogs should basically be the same. And I think we forget that they have feelings, and I think we forget that they have a brain, that they're sentient, that they have their own emotions, that they're going to think certain things. I think we need to stop assuming dogs can be so programmable. Okay? I think the best analogy you can really do or use is somewhat that of a child. I think that's the closest thing that we could look into it. I think when it does come to these behaviors, whether it's just simple obedience or something more, I think it is absolutely absurd not to believe that dogs can have disabilities, mentally especially. I think it's very odd that people still to this day don't believe that dogs can have anxiety, or anything of that matter. I think that that's quite insane to believe. I think the more that they are with us, the more domesticated they are, the more they are away from, I guess you could say, like their roots, so to speak. You know, dogs are more like companions now than they are working dogs. I think that that's going to always cause a little bit more of a ripple. COVID is a great example of that, right? If dogs didn't have feelings, if dogs, didn't have these social scenarios that they should be going through, etc., then COVID wouldn't have really done anything to them. But instead, because we've been home, we've created a lot of dogs who are anxious, and a lot of dogs who are more afraid, who have not been exposed. And a dog who can be scared or a dog who can be angry, it would be quite ironic to think that they can have those emotions, but they can't have other emotions or things that they can't control in their body, like their heart rate going too fast, which is theoretically one of the symptoms when it comes to anxiety, not being able to control themselves. So I think we need to take a minute and realize that dog training is not about slapping on a collar or whatever, or putting on a prong, or even delivering treats every time and all the time. I think we need to realize that these things take time and patience. And I think when it comes to the reality of dog training, we've come a long way. I think we've learned quite a few things. I know I have. And though my results in my younger years of doing dog training were different in the sense that, using more of a balanced approach where I was using aversive methods with like affection as a reward when they did it right. I think that one of the big things for me was definitely my kids. And, everyone has a different analogy, I guess, right? So some people look at dogs as dogs, and they're animals, and that's that. And, this is where they are on the hierarchy, I don't know, chickens and cows and pigs are down here, dogs are up here, and then people. So, there's that chain. I typically think that dogs and pretty much all animals are right there. They're right there. And I think that that's one of the big reasons why I realize now that when I would be using these methods, these aversive methods, it doesn't matter if you think that it's not hurting them. I think what's the most important about it is their mental state, their well-being. And I remember myself so many times where I would correct the dog, and the dog would be completely non-confrontational, basically shutting down. And this would be, for me, this would be a projection of like, look, the dog is settling now. The dog is calm. The dog is relaxed. not knowing what I know now, of course. And, this is why I think it's so important that we're continuing to educate ourselves and learning more as dog trainers. So I have a little bit of a different approach now when it comes to my clients. Actually, in so many ways, I ask my clients whether or not they're okay with being a little aversive with their dog. If they're okay with mentally affecting them to that degree. See, some people don't have a problem putting on a collar, a shock collar, or a prong, or any of those things. And if that truly is the case, then science-based, like positive reinforcement, probably isn't the role you want to take. If you want to learn and you want to get into, I think a higher level of understanding than just, correct, submit, and get the result you want. If you really want to get into the underlying issue, because at the end of the day, when we use these corrections, we're just correcting the surface. That's all we're doing. And one of the big reasons why I started to dig deep and, kind of expand my knowledge as opposed to just sticking to the balanced approach at the time was because the aversive methods that I was using with my dog at the time, typically I found that as the years went on, weird things started to kind of pop up a little bit. She was very high level trained. Search and rescue, you name it. She did everything. She was incredible. People would see her and want my card right away. That's how good she was. And, it took a little bit of a dive, and so obviously I looked into medical, if there's anything going on with maybe her hips, her legs. German Shepherds, they typically can be funny with that. But everything came out good. And this is when I started getting into the research and I found long-term side effects. What we used to do with children is a really great example, right? Things have changed. And I'm not saying that our kids are not soft. I forget that quote, but it was a really good quote. It was like, strong people create weak people, and weak people create hard times, and hard times create strong people. And it just kind of cycles, right? So you grow up with having nothing, and you want your kids to have everything. And this cycle kind of repeats. And the reason why I guess I'm saying that, hey, I'm no child psychologist, okay? But the reason why I'm saying that is because, there's no question about it. We've kind of changed our approach and so on. And people say stuff like, our kids are soft these days, or whatever case, or anxiety's on an all-time high, and this and that. But at the end of the day, we know for a fact that, for example, bullies and things like this were underlying issues that caused that surface scenario to come out. So you could punish a bully on the surface level as much as you want, which usually bullies in some ways, again, I'm just using an example, complete personal example, but a bully, would go home and probably get physically, mentally abused, which then that's, at home, the child was very kind of, I guess you could say, submit. And then at school, that's where that level would come over, where, the child would be hurting people or making fun of them or whatever. So the whole point of what I'm trying to say here is that when you're using these aversive methods, you could be creating long-term side effects, just like we know that has happened with children. And it's because they have brains. just like kids, and their activity level, their mind is that of a toddler, okay? A little bit older than a toddler maybe, okay? So this is why it's just so important that we focus on figuring out the underlying issue and understanding that these things take time, lots of time. You have a rescue who is from a different world, and now you have them on leash, and now they are expected to follow into this groove. I mean, that's a lot easier said than done. It takes time. You have a dog that you rescued from a puppy mill that has been, in a crate for 5 years, and now the dog is a little reactive outside. I mean, can you really blame the dog in some ways? So when you look at your results, recovery and not reacting and, focusing on you and being less less anxiety-like symptoms and so on, like all of these things take time. And one thing, though, doesn't change is that progressive desensitization, right? Being out there, getting out there, but in scenarios where your dog is less likely to react. This is complete science-based. This is why it takes time, but yet the results when you see them are huge. Not just that, but like it feels good to know that your dog is doing these things out of a complete respectful way. The dog is not afraid or nervous about whatever that, correction may be, right? So I'm not saying you don't say no to your dogs. I'm not saying that, you don't let them know when you're not happy. I let my kids know when they're not when I'm not happy. I let my dog know when I'm not happy. But what it means, though, is that you're focusing on the positive. You're focusing on rewarding the good moments. It's funny. You want to know the number one thing I get from people? The number one thing I get is if, let's say, the dog, I don't know, let me give you an example. Let's say the dog is barking out the window, okay? And I'll explain like why it's happening, like the theory behind it, like the psychology, but listen to this, okay? This is more about the human. So the dog's barking out the window. So the person says like, stop it, be quiet, whatever, the dog stops. And then they reward them. Whether it's affection or they're just like, good job, no barking or whatever. They have no problem doing that. They say like, yeah, this is good, my dog understands. And so what I say is, does the dog ever go by where the dog sees the human and doesn't bark at all? Like none? And they'll say, yeah, that happens too sometimes. I go, that's when you should really be rewarding them. And they always say to me, but how is the dog supposed to know that he's not supposed to bark? Right there. So you see what's happening? We associate that we need to correct them every time in order for them to learn what they're not supposed to do, right? But you need to focus on what they are supposed to do. If they see people go by and they're not barking and you're rewarding them, the dog is associating that when people go by, I can be quiet, I get rewarded, this is the right thing to do. Okay, so I'm not saying that what you were doing before is wrong. I'm just saying that isn't it funny how people think that if they correct the bark and then they pet the dog versus if the dog doesn't bark from the beginning, then they think that they shouldn't pet the dog. This is just like one of the little things I always say, which is, the secret to dog training is to reward nothing, right? So, like our kids, they know that there's a 50-50 chance if they're quiet, not doing anything, that we will give them attention, 50%. Versus if they're doing something wrong, they know that they will get our attention 100% of the time. So sometimes dogs will actually do things in order for you to react and then reward. So you got to look out for that too. There's a lot going on there. All right. I would love to hear from one of our premiums who specifically is having any kind of issues, who I could either have on the podcast, that would be amazing, or someone that we could get some questions from so that we can answer a few of them for our premiums. Okay, we really appreciate you. I also appreciate everyone else. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, this goes for anyone, okay, premium or not premium, please, cepodcast@canineeducation.ca. I want to hear from you. I want to, as you see, I'm in a different spot right now. I'm actually in the future podcast room. So I'm just getting some things ready, and hopefully the room will be ready very soon. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.